Shalom. Welcome back to Understanding the World with Rabbi David Kaufman. And today I am joined by my good friend, Mark Finkelstein from the Jewish Federation. Mark is the Jewish Community Relations Director, and he and I have done many shows together. In fact, we're on many different committees together and do a lot of work in a lot of different issues. So Mark is joining me today, and we'll talk a little bit about various issues. The first issue I think we're going to talk about today is the foreign policy in the State of the Union, or to me, a little bit of the lack of foreign policy discussion in the State of the Union. But first, Mark, welcome, and we'll let everybody see your picture here. Ryan, can you put up a picture of Mark? There's Mark.
Thank you, David. It's great to be here with you. Appreciate that.
Glad to have you here.
Thank you.
So, President Obama's speech, people around the world look to the State of the Union speech as kind of an indicator of where American policy is going to be going forward. And, we're involved in dealing with issues in Africa and genocide, and I've been involved over the years in hunger relief. We certainly care about Israel and the Middle East in general, the whole Iran issue, Syria, what's going on with the Egyptian government. The president didn't mention much of that in his speech other than in very general terms. I don't know, what was your reaction to the State of the Union speech?
Well, first of all, it seemed to have a softer edge than the one last year. And indeed, it seemed to have been an extension of his inauguration speech in the first place. A lot of it, to me, derives from his campaign rhetoric to begin with. You agree with that, David?
Well, yeah, I think for sure the focus of this president's second term, at least as it starts, is on domestic politics and getting America's house in order before we worry about what's going on outside the house. Now, for me, the president has to be concerned about doing everything all at the same time.
Yes.
Because you really can't pick and choose. And the trouble that's going on overseas invariably affects us.
Maybe that's because his selection process is still in flux. And in other words, Obama probably has an idea of where he wants to go with this. And some people, in essence, have analyzed his speech as simply a litany of items that appeal to the liberal community more than anything else. And this being his first State of the Union after his inauguration, it seems he's putting his agenda on the table, but in a way that is not intended to polarize the Congress more than it is at present. What do you think about that?
Well, I think the biggest issue that he mentioned in his State of the Union speech was essentially gun control, which is a highly polarizing issue for the Congress.
But most Americans, I believe, want some reasonable sense of gun control.
Absolutely. I would agree with that.
And so, first of all, the speech itself was laid out in a certain way to come to a climax at the end. And the climax was when he started introducing the people in the audience who have a relationship to all these bad things that have happened over the years, and therefore to give some sort of emotional molding to the speech and to leave it at a high point.
I would say clearly the high point of the speech
was the gun control.
Was the issue was when he was calling on certainly the people in Newtown, Massachusetts, should be able to sign Aurora, Colorado. I thought that was fantastic speech making.
Well, it is, because it has the elements of repetition. We've seen other presidents use short repetitive phrases. They need to, what's the phrase? They need to vote. You need to vote.
They need to have a voice.
They need to have a voice. Yeah. All those things, they're popularist types of appeals to the population as a whole. And because we were so deeply affected by Aurora, by the Connecticut shootings, this has left a deep scar, I feel, on the American people.
And I heard, yesterday a report that says each one of the 100 senators was able to bring one person to the State of the Union address, and over a third of them brought somebody directly affected by gun violence.
Yes, and Gabby Gifford was there, and certainly that was the emotional point. And it wasn't John Boehner did stand and applaud for that bit, did he not? Yeah. So
and the reality is that those on the left wing tend to criticize whether or not we need to have the right to bear arms at all, or what that means.
Right.
Those on the right wing want to say, yes, virtually anything should be okay. No, my statement is, we have the right to bear arms. We even have the right to arm bears at this point. But why are we arming crazy bears with assault weapons? The issue that comes up that I think really needs to be discussed is the one of whether or not the policies that we're talking about putting in place would have stopped any of these mass shootings. And as a concern, when you're trying to implement policy based on events that have happened, if the policies that you're implementing are not going to have an impact, then you got to rethink your policy.
Well, it looks like if you promulgate regulations that don't have an impact on what you're trying to stop, you have a different agenda. Does that make sense to you, David?
Yeah, well, I think there's an agenda of trying to remove guns from people's hands in general.
In general, which is across the board not particularly reasonable.
And then there's an agenda of trying to keep the worst offenders from getting the worst weapons. And it seems to me that we have unanimity on the last one.
Right. There are multiple items on the table, not all of which are reasonable, not all of which have general consensus.
Yeah, I don't know whether we're going to be able to get overwhelming kinds of gun control through. In fact, I don't know that the American population is interested in trying to get overwhelming kinds of gun control through Congress. But it would seem to me that gun control that takes assault weapons out of the hands of crazy people
is very reasonable,
is
very
something
useful.
that virtually everybody's going to support.
Right.
Now, speaking of dangerous weapons in the hands of crazy people, the foreign policy portions of the State of the Union, the president spoke of the fact that Al-Qaeda is weakened. Now, one of the questions we're dealing with here is, how do you measure that?
Well, and also, who do you think Al-Qaeda is? Because there are more splinter groups that have some tangential relationship to Al-Qaeda that are clearly in the ascendancy.
Yeah, like Mali, for example. We're sitting here looking at the French government having to basically go to war in Mali.
That's right.
We've got the Taliban strong enough that they have withstood United States and Afghan government pressure for years now, and still there. We're talking about holding them back.
Which brings up the topic of what does it mean to withdraw the troops from Afghanistan? Certainly we all want our troops home safe and sound. But when you withdraw them and you don't specify the desired result, you may be able to voice that on somebody, but you won't be able to defend it in a historical sense.
Well, yes. I mean, there's the issue of how do you define victory? Do you define, to a certain extent, you can define victory simply by the fewer American casualties, the better.
Or by empowering the proxies that we have remaining in Afghanistan. But that has nothing to do with defeating the Taliban.
But if you define the victory for the United States as fewest U.S. casualties during this current event right now,
right,
then you ignore the impact going forward. That if the Taliban become the dominant power there again, and all of a sudden it becomes a terrorist breeding ground, we've lost. I don't think there's any question.
The paradigm then is to go and look at what's happening in Iraq. Now, certainly Iraq is as trifurcated as it ever has been. The Kurds have not seen any any increase in their social structure or power in the country. And I'm not sure anybody's really looking at it, so we don't have that much information to draw
Well,
from.
I was going to say, Mark, you're bringing up a country that no one's really even paying attention to right now, other than maybe, we pulled our last troops out in Iraq.
Yeah.
That's pretty much been the extent of attention paid to Iraq lately. The big crazy people with guns, North Korea and Iran, did make it into the State of the Union speech. And the president said, of course, our challenges don't end with al-Qaeda. America will continue to lead the effort to prevent the spread of the world's most dangerous weapons. The regime in North Korea must know that they will only achieve security and prosperity by meeting their international obligations. Provocations of the sort we saw last night, because that was when they did the nuclear test, will only isolate them further as we stand by our allies, strengthen our own missile defense, and lead the world in taking firm action in response to these actions. Now, I'm kind of wondering what our firm action was.
I have no idea, but it's been reported, maybe you could correct me, that Iranian advisors were present at that particular test in North Korea.
I would assume that Iranian advisors not only were present, but they've been part of the entire process all the way up to this point, which gets to what I was talking about earlier, that North Korea is working on the spread of nuclear technology. Among the places where it's been spreading is North Korea. Well, and there's a concern actually among the Chinese.
Yes.
The Chinese technology that went to North Korea is going to make its way to Iran.
Well, I think historically you just have to trace it back to 2007 in September. Wasn't there a North Korean relationship with the Syrian nuclear project as well?
Or yes, I mean there was, and I think there was. I think they've been involved in a number of different programs, but for sure the Syrian one. And their technology is making its way all over the place.
That's right. And so the fact that you're saying that we have no idea about the component of the weapon they've tested is troubling, because we don't know what exactly they have been testing, whether it's uranium or plutonium to begin with, or maybe another type of device, and how that plays into the increasing production aimed at by Iran. What is your take on where Iran is? Because there's news today that Iran has purchased band magnets.
Yes.
Did you come across that?
I saw an article that was talking about that today, that would enable them to increase the speed of their enrichment and the proficiency of their enrichment. I don't know whether they've gotten them or not. Well, I can't remember whether it said they were delivered or whether they had purchased them. But there are certainly concerns. The Israeli government and Benjamin Netanyahu the other day was talking about the fact that Iran was moving faster toward acquiring nuclear weapons. The world is distracted right now. And, I tend to wonder whether or not part of why President Obama is going to
the Middle
East right now to meet with the Israelis, the Palestinian Authority, and Jordan is to say, look, the time is getting close to do something about Iran, and Iran is going to retaliate against you guys. And if that's the case, it would make sense why there is virtually no mention of the peace process at all in the speech. I mean, let's just talk about that for a moment before we take our next break here. Regarding the Arab Spring, Israel, in defense of freedom, we will the Arab Spring in Israel. In defense of freedom, we will remain the anchor of strong alliances from the Americas to Africa, from Europe to Asia. In the Middle East, we will stand with citizens as they demand their universal rights and support stable transitions to democracy. The process will be messy, and we cannot presume to dictate the course of change in countries like Egypt, but we can and will insist on respect for the fundamental rights of all people. We will keep the pressure on a Syrian regime that has murdered its own people and support opposition leaders that respect the rights of every Syrian.
Each one of those sentences contain a couple of ideas that alone would take several minutes to unpack.
Well, and we'll unpack them.
Okay.
And we stand steadfast with Israel in pursuit of security and a lasting peace. These are the message I will deliver when I travel to the Middle East next month. There's no mention of the Palestinians. There's no mention of the state of Palestine at this point. There's no mention of the peace process at all. There's no mention of no specific mention of many, many, many problems, and we will talk about all of those after our break.